Hi everyone, thank you for having me here. Last year I had to evacuate Kyiv with my two daughters, and I worked 1 year in Rome and recently moved to Berlin, and now here I'm working on my PhD thesis about contemporary Ukrainian contemporary art practices, which work with Soviet heritage, and I would like show some of them. The history of Soviet period is always have been a very emotional tense for Ukrainians. Not least it was and it is because it's a constant manipulation and of Russian propaganda, and particularly since annexation of Crimea and the beginning of war in 2014, and especially after full-scale invasion, Russian propaganda has specifically claimed Soviet as Russian, and as a result, Soviet is not longer perceived as Ukrainian past, but mostly as Russian present, and this leads to growing intolerance and hatred towards this heritage in society. And due to such manipulation, Ukrainians ready to get rid of the cultural heritage of this period, this very complex, totalitarian, let's say, colonial past, but it was a time when was created a unique Ukrainian Soviet cultural phenomenon. And unfortunately, this phenomenon now, as material object of this phenomenon now disappearing very rapidly, especially Soviet art in public space, sculptures, monuments, decorative panels, mosaics, etc. There is a most vulnerable objects that are deliberately destroyed in all Ukrainian regions. Kremlin propaganda actively uses the theme of the Soviet past in the ongoing war. This is a photo of the victory flag mosaic in Krasnodon, Lugansk region. It's a real masterpiece by prominent Ukrainian artist of the 20th century, Alagorska, the leader of this artistic group, depict the member of the, and this mosaic depicts the member of the Yos Guard. The Yos Guard was a local Soviet Yos resistance movement during the Second World War. And this city Krasnodon, occupied since 2014 by Russians, and recently Vladimir Putin mentioned the Krasnodon city in one of his speech, comparing the current Russian occupation soldier to members of Yas Guard. And this is a photo of dismantled or vandalized monuments, mostly which are dedicated to World War II. This happens all the time under the slogans, "Get Russian soldiers out." And why did Soviet soldiers become Russian soldiers? Because it's actually Putin's thesis, and the main goal, the Kremlin propaganda, that the Soviet should not longer perceived as a Ukrainian past, but only as a Russian presence. And each of these monuments has a plaque listing names of local residents who died during the Second World War. But all these Soviet soldiers' monuments still being destroyed as Russian soldiers. However, as for me, this photo is an absolutely proof that it is not the same. Soviet is not Russian. Acceptance and understanding of the Ukrainian Soviet heritage, as for me, really counteract Kremlin propaganda. It is important to emphasize a regional phenomena and regional history of that period in order to deconstruction ideological and propaganda narratives, both Soviet and Russian Federation. That's why it's very important to take in account the definition we work with. In our practice as DENEDE initiative, we always emphasize this definition, Ukrainian Soviet cultural heritage or Ukrainian Soviet art. Because it is Ukrainian, it was created on the territory of Ukraine and by Ukrainian artists, but it also Soviet because it was created in special condition in certain special Soviet system of art production. And when all art was ideological and served propaganda purpose. But this Sovietness does not reduce the artistic value and the historical significance of this heritage. Actually, in order to study in order to study, preserve, and critically analyze the Ukrainian Soviet cultural phenomenon, Soviet cultural heritage, we as DENEDE initiative gathered in former Soviet cinema Russia in Vinnytsia in 2015. Among us were historians, artists, architects, writers, and activists. In this period, the law of decommunization has just been passed in Ukraine, but although the process of decommunization in Ukraine began in 1990s, immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union and maybe a bit early, in different periods this process is intensified and weakened, and the most intensive phase began at the end of 2013 when protesters knocked down a Lenin's monument in the center of Kyiv during the Revolution of Dignity. This event triggered a wave of spontaneous destruction in different regions of Ukraine, which was called the Leninopad, Leninofall, and it also led to the creation and adoption of the communization law. This law prohibits the presence of Soviet symbols and propaganda in public space, although the law does not apply to works of art, but at the same time the law does not define the works of art. However, it is impossible to divide, to separate art from propaganda of that period. That's why law applies to monumental art in particular, and led and leads to material lose some object of this heritage. This Soviet cinema Russia is located at the heart of Vinnytsia on a hilltop above the South Bug River. It was once the biggest cinema hall in the area since 1970s. And after the cinema stopped showing movies in 1995, the building gradually degraded until 2015, when we gathered there, invited artists and researchers, discuss how decommunization changed public space. We call this artistic residence Nadbogom. It is an ironic and a bit provocative name, literally translated as above God. The historical name of the Southern Bug River, on the bank of which this residence took place, sounds like bog, and with such help of play on words, we highlight the process of changing toponyms and renaming, which is also a part of the decommunization process in Ukraine. And actually the name DENEDE, it's also a play on words with variable combination of decommunization, decolonization, even de-ideologization and deconstruction, which are constantly present in the discourse of our practice. It's a title, our very favorite and title work of our residence since 2015 by Alexander Yeltsin. There was a title Russia, but somehow and somewhere it disappeared, and Alexander Yeltsin put this short word there on the facade of Cinema Russia. Our DENEDE practice can generally be classified or divided into two main directions. First, it's a work with non-obvious and unrecognized cultural heritage, mostly in public space, and second, the integration of contemporary art practices into the work of traditional regional museums. The main type of our activity is a research expedition. Since 2015, we have traveled almost all over Ukraine and tagged all these our trips with the hashtag "Люби та знай свій рідний край." It means love and know your native land. For example, for several years we have been documenting the phenomenon of post-Lenin. It is about what happened with the pedestals after the dismantling of Lenin monuments, because the pedestals cannot stay empty for long because of its very essence. It's like the pedestal seems to require to presence something on it. And first, after 2015, at first some graffiti or DIY object appeared on these pedestals, and gradually they were replaced by decorative composition and some new sculptures, and most often this modern sculpture absolutely repeats the stylistic of Soviet sculpture. But sometimes, sometimes very funny and deeply, as for me, deeply symbolic images appeared on these pedestals. For example, a clock and a flower decorative tree, a bird's nest with chicks, and my favorite one is a giant egg painted over a flower, which seems to symbolize the expectation of the birth of a new hero or some new ideology. This egg from Kaharlik. Such expedition could be spontaneous when we went to explore a new place, or they could be planned and regular as part of a specific project. For example, our long-term ongoing project on prospective villages about a large-scale social experiment was conducted on the territory of Ukraine when it was Ukrainian SSR, which aimed to change the living conditions of the rural population. The idea was to try to combine the city with the village, and the active phase of the experiment lasted from the beginning of the 60s to the end of the 80s. During the reform, many small villages disappeared and large-scale inter-rural migration took place. At the same time, unique infrastructure projects were implemented in the selected as perspective villages. The main demonstration villages were 31 villages, where a new type of infrastructure were developed. Cultural centers, high-rise residential buildings, department stores, restaurants, hotels, museums, cinema, etc. The experiment stopped when the state in which it originated collapsed. But this experimental demonstration village still exists till now, and people live there who were forced to become participants of this experiment. And there is no answer to the question or whether this experiment was successful. And it's very gross and violent interference in the life of the residents of these selected villages. And a lot of people was forced to participate in this experiment. It actually was an experiment on living people. And it obviously have a very, it's a huge influence of the image of Ukrainian village in the second half of 20th century. And also it contributed to creation a large number of valuable objects of architecture and monumental art. Because the leading architect and artists were involved into development of experimental demonstration village. Our project called Unperspective Village, because we just put this question, what is perspectiveness of this village? Our project is attempt to analyze this experiment, to investigate the experimentality each of the 41 villages, to study the available archival materials and architectural features of development of these villages, and to trace how these experimental villages were transformed and how they live today. We also organized long-term expedition to a certain region. For example, expedition in Bessarabia, Odessa region in 2018, where we explored Soviet-era cultural infrastructure artifacts. During Soviet era, art and education were completely controlled by a state ideology, and a network of cultural institutions was established which served the official representation of official art and was used to develop and promote culture as ideology. And today a significant part of these items have degraded. Most cinemas are destroyed or repurposed into shops or church or just neglected. And in contrast, there are no contemporary cultural public space and cultural centers or cinemas in small villages and towns. In our project, during our expedition, we proposed to pay attention to the presence of objects of cultural infrastructure and to restore their original function and somehow revitalize them. We had a mobile equipment for film screening and organized unexpected screening on closed and abandoned cinemas in Tatarbunare, Kotovsk, Belgorod-Dnestrovsky, and Izmail. We projected contemporary Ukrainian directors' films literally on the wall of closed cinemas. In this simple way, we returned these objects to their authentic function and remind the local community about the importance of object of cultural heritage, of culture infrastructure, and as a necessary component of each city ecosystem. Such expedition, a very important part of our museum work. By the way, last year in March, when we were leaving Ukraine, all the roads towards the western borders were completely jammed, and our experience of our expedition that helped us to drive quickly, because we know a lot of skipping roads and we avoid the traffic jam. About our museum expedition in the fall of 2017, we made a museum expedition to Donetsk and Lugansk region. We visited 33 museums located in during 1 month, located in military conditions and very close to the battle lines, and some of them cities that were occupied and later deoccupied in 2014-2015. And after this expedition, we implemented 4 temporary exhibitions in different museums, one of which was in the Sergei Prokofiev Memorial Museum near Donetsk. The famous Soviet composer Sergei Prokofiev was born in Ukraine in village Sontsivka near Donetsk. And in his memorial museum, we explored the phenomenon of hidden history. Our project called Prokofiev Cause. This museum has an elegant, very amazing exhibition based on a detailed autobiography of Sergei Prokofiev. However, in the 1980s, not all aspects of composer's life suited to Soviet ideology. The exhibit does not mention his complicated family history, known as Prokofiev cause, casus Prokofieva, because Sergei Prokofiev had two official wives. His first wife was Spanish singer Lina Kadina, with whom he married while touring in Europe. And after returning to USSR, she was accused of spying and sent to Siberian prison. And Sergei Prokofiev then remarried without going through a divorce, because Soviet lawyers considered a marriage concluded abroad to be illegal. So, and when Prokofiev died on the same day with Joseph Stalin, his first wife was freed from prison shortly, and it so happens that he had two widows who claimed his legacy. And this case is commonly known in the legal field, in the field of jurisprudence, as casus Prokofieva. But there was no mention in his memorial museum. So together with the museum staff, we tried to restore historical justice and return this suppressed history to the museum exhibition. And this is one of the methods of, as we called it, content-based decommunization, because it's not just remove visual presence of Soviet period, but really a deep rethinking. It's one method. It consists in recreating hidden history. Yes, this is a part of a photo of our exhibition and a collage of by Katerina Yermolaeva about this casus Prokofieva story. As one of our, as for me, our important museum project for we worked together with artist and curator Nikita Kadan. The project of museum interaction between Soviet and contemporary art called Attitude Gesture. It was at the Kyiv Museum. The Kyiv Museum is a unique institution located in a small village in Zhytomyr region. It's about more than 100 kilometers from Kyiv. The museum collection included about 3,000 works of graphic sculpture and paintings and decorative and applied art from the second half of 20th century from the former, all former Soviet Republic, not only Ukrainian Soviet art, but also quite big collection from Central Asia, former Soviet Republic. It's important that Kyiv Museum is the only cultural and scientific institution in Ukraine that preserved and presents the art of Soviet period exclusively. For example, almost every Ukrainian museum have some collection of Soviet period art and Soviet period history, but this museum works with this period exclusively. So it's not just a museum of art, but it is museum of Soviet art. And in 2019, with Nikita Kadan, we decided to create a contemporary art department in Kyiv Museum and began the artistic gesture program. This program consists of several series of intervention exhibitions showing works based on an active, engaged attitude to issues and problems rooted in the Soviet period. In this program, contemporary artworks were used as a keys for critical understanding for Soviet art, and work represents in Kyiv Museum collection. The program Attitude Gesture consisted of six episodes, short thematic exhibition where contemporary authors critically analyzed the legacy of the Soviet era. The first episode, Enlightenment and Paternalism, is about how educational practices in USSR became part of paternalistic governance and propaganda. The episode Reading of Debris discussed how the image of the ruins of modernity has become a cross-cutting image in today's humanitarian thoughts, and multimedia contemporary art has been filled with images of ruins no less than romantic paintings and graphics. The episode War in Museum explores the ways in which Soviet and contemporary art looks at the war, to the Second World War and the ongoing war. The exhibition Today We Will Invent the Nation is dedicated to the construction and deconstruction of the national component of human coexistence. In particular, the exhibition examines the relationships between the idea of the national and the Soviet project, the role of the national form in Soviet and post-Soviet art. The episode Unbadient Bodies engaged in a polemical dialogue between works from the Kyiv collection and contemporary art, analyzing the ways of representing the body and corporeality. The epilogue episode about the independence addresses the question of what we can call Soviet art. This project touch various aspects of the representation of Soviet art, and it's really relevant for most Ukrainian museum because it shows how critical aspect of the exhibition of Soviet art can and should be illuminated. In this work of Ukrainian artist Volodymyr Vorotnyov, Des Communismus, in this work the author shows how young people carelessly use Soviet-era monuments and current ideologically charged parts of public space for skateboarding, and the way out from under the ideological hypnosis of symbol immortalized in architecture and monumental art can be achieved not only by destroying the later, and subcultural community is revitalizing and de-ideologizing this space by using the smooth granite surface for their own purpose. The direction of museum works of DENEDE initiative is called Museum Open for Innovation, and since 2015 we have been actively working with small regional museums. We regularly met together with museum workers from different regions, and we organize workshops and discussion about modern museum practices, and involved contemporary art in the work of traditional museums. And during this time we have formed such a solidarity inter-museum community, and we all know each other well, and we are constantly in contact. And also we implemented numerous exhibitions in various museums, therefore we know the museum collection and their speciality, and accordingly we know their needs. And from the first day of full-scale war, DENEDE started to help with museum evacuation, and our colleagues Leonid Marusyak, Marta Bilas, and Dana Brezhneva, Zhana Kadyrova, Ivan Yatsenko, they went to most dangerous regions and saving local museum collections, literally under fire. And this is possible due to the fact that personal communication has been established, and with museum employers and local authorities. And the main thing is that there is a mutual trust, and in critical situation it was possible to avoid complicated bureaucratic formalities and save the time, because the time is crucial in this situation. But unfortunately, for the security reason, information about museum and museum collection is not public, and we also had temporarily deactivate our website because it was hosting information about museum collection of more than 100 museums we work with. So, as I cannot speak in detail about museum, I will return to Ukrainian Soviet heritage. As DENEDE, we advocated and defended Ukrainian Soviet architecture and monumental art for a long time. However, in the light of crimes perpetrated by Russians in Ukraine, we are no longer able to stop demolition of monuments, even can't say something against demolition, because we all know that their presence is very, very painful for Ukrainians. And because the Russian soldiers with Soviet flags and Soviet slogans bombing Ukrainian cities and killing Ukrainians. And now I want to show our project from since 2018. It's a part of long-term project called Yellow Line. It was realized in 10 cities of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. The Yellow Line project revealed the value and the uniqueness on non-obvious objects of cultural heritage which were not recognized. And many valuable architectural objects and monumental art objects were neglected both of ideological and everyday reason. And the Yellow Line outlined important artistic and architectural heritage. Together with museum, our colleagues from museums of Donetsk and Lugansk region, we explored the most expressive object of such period. Today, the most of these cities are destroyed and occupied by Russians. And the documentation of Yellow Line project remains almost the only attempt to study such object. Because of most material object has been destroyed, and this Yellow Line documentation preserved as a memory of it. Together with architect Alexei Bykov, we discovered architecture and urban planning of Severodonetsk. The results we present in an exhibition in 2018. Severodonetsk is a city that appeared during the first 5-year period, Persha Pyaterichka of Soviet regime on the territory of Donbass. However, the Second World War essentially destroyed everything built in that period. Therefore, the modern image of the city was formed by the post-war reconstruction. The city was designed by the Ukrmizbud Project Institute, and the construction of the city was carried out by the Lishimstroy local organization. In this exhibition, we wanted to emphasize that the city of Severodonetsk was not a typical Soviet settlement, because it was built according to a unique urban plan that was developed specifically for this area and with the participation of local professionals. Now Severodonetsk is occupied by Russian Federation. Rather, the territory that used to be the city of Severodonetsk, because during the capture, the Russian army almost completely destroyed the city. According to official data, the city was destroyed by 90%. And when the time comes to rebuild this city, it will be built anew from, let's say, a new blank. Because the Soviet past of this city will disappear. The city will lose their history. Severodonetsk has no other history as the Soviet one. And this city was destroyed in 21st century by soldiers who used Soviet symbols and slogans. And together with the flag of Russian Federation, they set up red flags on this captured territory. And another exhibition presented as part of this project Yellow Line called Boreviter. It was about Ukrainian Soviet monumental art. In 1967, in the interior of restaurant Ukraine in Mariupol, famous Ukrainian artists created two mosaic panels, Boreviter, and Tree of Life. Here you can see the group of authors. All these authors called the 60s. They were opposed the Soviet regime, but at the same time, they all worked in the field of monumental propaganda. This is one of paradoxes of Ukrainian Soviet monumental art, which actually show that this phenomenon much more complicated than it might seem. These works are real masterpieces. After the collapse of Soviet Union, the restaurant became privately owned and did not function many years. It was closed, and in 2018, we found the owner and we took permission from the owner to hold an exhibition there. The main exhibits of which were these two mosaics, which we highlighted and added detailed information about mosaics and about their authors, and also combined with some artwork of contemporary artists from Mariupol and from Kyiv. And the main goal for us was to give the city residents the opportunity to see unique works that had been inaccessible for several decades. Also, as a part of the project, we appealed to the local authorities, to the municipality, to protect these mosaics as an important and valuable works of art, namely to provide them with special monument, official monument protection status. But unfortunately, no status will protect against Russian missiles. And during the battle for Mariupol, which lasted from February 24 to May 20, 2022, the troop of Russian Federation destroyed both artworks. And now I would like to show a short video about this our project. It was created last year by Alexei Romanenko and amazing music of Olesya Onikienko. It's a really short one. Can you help me? Yeah, so today the Ukrainian Soviet cultural heritage is under double threat, as it being destroyed both by Russian missiles and unfortunately by the Ukrainians themselves because of Russian propaganda. Ukraine has been at war for 9 years now, and almost 2 years take place especially terrible and destructive invasion of the Russian Federation, which has simply destroyed entire cities in our country. But despite the ongoing war, life goes on in Ukraine, and there is an unbreakable and absolutely belief in victory, and the liberated cities gradually being rebuilt by volunteers. For example, an incredible initiative Rebuild Together, when the volunteers and activists organize parties during which they help the locals to rebuild their settlement. And also the officials are discussing a large-scale project for the reconstruction and rebuilding of cities. And often in this discussion they look to experience of other countries. But at the same time, Ukraine has our own unique experience in post-war reconstruction. It's about the experimental laboratory of art ceramics of the Academy of Architecture of Ukrainian SSR. It was created in 1946 for the post-war reconstruction of Kyiv after Second World War, and its creation was initiated by the president of the Academy of Architecture, architect Volodymyr Zabolotny, and art critic and the artist Panteleimon Musienko. The team was headed by the chemist, engineer, and artist Nina Fedorova. Therefore, the laboratory was usually unofficially called Nina Fedorova's workshop, and the workshop was located on the territory of Sofia of Kyiv, and from there another popular and unofficial name, Sofia Pottery. The post-war Krещатик was the first project where the laboratory members participated. Mostly they dismantled the ruins of buildings by hand, but at the same time it was Oksana Gruzinska began to develop some terracotta profile elements with traditional floral ornaments for decoration the upper floors of building. And in following the case, this author was implemented and developed using of such composition in the various projects, not only in Kyiv, but in different cities of Ukraine. And this author, Oksana Gruzinska, for the VDNG complex, the complex of the exhibitional, huge exhibitional park of Soviet period. In the late 50s, Oksana Gruzinska created ornamental reliefs for entrance group of the Animal Agriculture Pavilion. This soft blue pattern surrounding the monumental figures of the farm workers, Soviet farm workers, created by the sculptor Ivan Makogon. And recently, several years ago, contemporary Ukrainian artist Zhana Kadyrova and Denis Ruban made the artistic intervention in the space of VDNG. Specifically, they added the golden nymphs to the figures of Soviet collective farmers on this pavilion. And in this way, they ironically emphasized some similar approaches of sacred and totalitarian art. The main principle of the laboratory works were co-creation and synthesis of art. Artists created ceramic production with which architects organically integrate and combine in interiors and exteriors of modernistic buildings. The leading idea was to introduction of Ukrainian national motifs as the most thematically and functionally justified and appropriate for this territory. For this purpose, the laboratory invited folk potters and craftsmen who have present the artistic tradition of ceramics from several generations. There are many their artworks in interiors of hotels, cinemas, metro station, pharmacies, schools, as they say, their ceramic was traditional in form and modern in content. And it's also very important to say that it was not just a workshop or just an artistic studio, and since the 60s it was some meeting place for a cultural community in Kyiv, like a dissidenti, 60s, шестидесятники, writers, filmmakers, journalists, poets, gathering there on a regular basis. This place was some informal cultural center. As DENEDE initiative, we have been working for several years to create a special museum of the laboratory in the original building in Sofia Kyivska, because its place is very important, especially for understanding the incomparability of the scale, how such a small laboratory, there was no more than 10 people worked together, and this small studio and workshop creates such a large-scale artistic phenomenon that shapes the visual texture of Kyiv of the second half of 20th century and has a significant influence on different cities in Ukraine. And one of the well-known projects of this laboratory is the interior of the Hryshchatyk metro station. The authors Oksana Grudzinska and Hanna Sharai. These Mayolika panels on platform looks like Ukrainian traditional carpets, and in this composition was used a special color, like a corporative color of the laboratory called glaze of the restorative fire, полива відновлюючого вогню, or Baal's blood. It's a dark red color with a deep copper sheen, which was invented by Nina Fedorova, but unfortunately after her death, this recipe lost. Here I would like to show the work of contemporary Israeli artist Zoya Cherkassky. Unfortunately, she's not a member of the DENEDE initiative, but maybe later we can invite her. And she was born in Kyiv and often shows Kyiv images of her Soviet childhood in her artwork. And this diptych called Grandma, the first part was created in 2015, and the second in March of 2022. And here you can see Grandmother hiding in the subway from Russian bombs, and you can recognize a fragment of these Mayolika panels from experimental laboratory of architectural ceramic. Unfortunately, quite a lot of the lab's project in the public space were lost, most of them during the renovation period of the early 2000s. But even now, such sad cases still happened. But we tried to investigate and preserve the original works, or at least fragments or elements as much as possible. A few years ago, one of the Kyiv metro station was being renovated, and the unique modular tiles, variantni plitki by Hanna Sharai, were knocked down and replaced by typical tiles. And our colleague Alexei Bykov collected them for our future museum, I hope. And a few months ago, we were participated at the Kyiv Biennale exhibition in Vienna, and there we presented an exposition dedicated to preservation and understanding of Soviet cultural heritage, and showed these saved tiles by Hanna Sharai in this exhibition. And also, This is another work we created for Kyiv Biennial in Vienna. This is structure, it's an exact replica of Soviet honor board, Doshka Poshany, from the village of Prishepevka in Kirovograd region. On this board of honor, we showed selected relevant activistic initiative which works in Ukraine with comprehension and preservation of the Ukrainian Soviet cultural heritage. Because this sphere is mainly the responsibility of grassroots and activist initiatives, some independent researchers and artists, because official institutions and authorities usually try to avoid this topic, preferring to practice prohibition and demolition. And recently, an addition to decommunization law called Anti-Pushkin was adopted, and now the impact of the decommunization law is becoming wider. For example, it now applies to objects that have a monument, official monument protection status. And now this destruction of Ukrainian Soviet cultural heritage is excessively intensified. And a few days ago, in the small town of Brovary near Kyiv, a decorative panel was dismantled from the post office. As for me, it's a very accurate metaphor for decommunization in Ukraine. This artwork was dismantled, consisting of 5 engraved medallions, about 2 meters diameter of each other. And the medallions are dedicated for the architecture of different cities. At that time, there were Soviet cities, because it's beginning of 1980s. The official reason for this action was to remove images of aggressor countries' cities from the public space. There is indeed images of Moscow and Leningrad, but there were also Kyiv, Riga, and Samarkand. We can say that 2 Russian cities dominated the composition over 1 Ukrainian city. But on the other hand, we can see 3 non-Russian cities dominated the 2 Russian ones. So it depends on our point of view. But it's especially unfortunate that in order to remove Moscow, we have to remove also Kyiv. And is it true that by destroying the monument of Soviet period, we are destroying the artworks of Ukrainian artists? And this one of the thesis when we constantly repeat in our works, that is most important to look not so much as who the monument or mosaic depicts, but first of all at the authorship and artistic qualities of the work. The author of this panel was the artist Elfat Kadyrov, the Ukrainian artist from Bashkortostan originally. He is the father of one of the most famous and important contemporary Ukrainian artists, Zhenia Kadyrova. Maybe you know about her. In her artistic practices, Zhenia Kadyrova deeply and consistently works with the theme of understanding and preserving cultural heritage in Ukraine, and in particular, Ukrainian Soviet heritage. And a few years ago, as DENEDE initiative, we appealed to Ukrposhta with the message that this is very important to preserve this artwork, because it's about connection between generations, and it's about the continuity of cultural progress. And the genius of the artist Kadyrova was formed for certain components, and in particular for her father's work. And it's very important to understanding this connection. We cannot erase the Soviet period from our history, because it was a tragic, totalitarian, colonial. It was a terrible time, but it was our current identity based on and our contemporary culture. And it's like a psychotherapy. We can't change it, and we have to accept it. Instead, we are offered simply hide the external manifestation of Soviet in order to forget about it. I recently participated in a discussion about the possibility or impossibility of cooperation between Ukrainian and Russian artists during the war. Often this impossibility perceived as a boycott of artists and curators because of their nationality, or as I say, exclusion by passport. But in our field, in field of working with Soviet heritage, this is really necessary because today is very important to develop the thesis the Soviet is not Russian, and today is important to talk about the Ukrainian Soviet, Kazakh Soviet, and Moldovan Soviet. It's important to get rid of modern Moscow-centered view of modernistic architecture. For example, for many years, Moscow curators and researchers has been research heritage in Central Asia and discovered their modernism and show them their modernism. But today is especially important to talk about our own school of Ukrainian modernism, Lithuanian modernism, and to emphasize the regional specific of each of them. So that its heritage can belong to our countries directly without being Russian. And the real support and solidarity from Russians should be silenced. The Russian voice has always dominated in this area, and today any association with Russia leads to really destruction and leads to really loss of cultural, material object of cultural heritage. And therefore this cancel Russian culture movement is really makes sense for preservation of material object of cultural heritage. And we should appropriate of return of Ukrainian Soviet heritage and talk more about the Soviet through the perspective of regional phenomenon. And I don't know, I sometimes have adapted to show these photos, but I have maybe a few minutes, yeah? This photo is a mosaic from Rubizhne. Now this city is destroyed by the Russian army and occupied this territory. And I don't know what happened to this mosaic, but there is a little hope that it survived. It depicts a festive Soviet salute, probably to salute to День Перемоги, 9th of May. And it really looks like phosphorus bombs. Here is a screenshot of Google search, phosphorny bomb in Ukrainian. Here is a photo of the explosions and tips how to act during such shelling and how to provide first aid to the victims. The Geneva Convention prohibits the use of phosphorus bomb because they cause a serious and painful injuries. This photo is from Lugansk region, particularly this screenshot, where the city is Donetsk region were most often shelled with phosphorus bomb. In particular, phosphorus bomb were fired at town of Rubizhne. So I don't know, it's a very sad point of, it's a very sad end of my presentation, but unfortunately there is, it is really sad. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Now I think it's time for a Q&A. And if it's okay, I would like to ask the first question, I think. So I remember some time ago, maybe it still exists, but you had a project on Facebook, I would say, with Żółto-Błękit, which is yellow and blue. And that was a very ironic and also kind of funny project where Zhenia was posting Soviet symbols but basically just painted with very literally on top of these symbols with the yellow and blue colors of Ukrainian flag. And so yeah, maybe I wanted maybe to have your take on this type of decommunization, because I think that's very interesting, because you're perceiving that as artistic gesture as well. And another question would be about motherland, because there was also discussion big about that. Maybe you were discussing with DENEDE team about if it makes sense or not, or which kind of, what do you think about just in general Soviet symbols in public spaces, and what would be maybe perfect idea how to preserve them, and if they should stay in public spaces or not? And yeah, this is a question.
Thank you for your question. About Soviet symbols, we always propose to use this method of contextualization, not to hide or demolish this symbol, but just try to explain why and when and with which was purpose they appeared, and in which circumstances. Because the attempt to hide all visual, all Soviet visuality just in a surface, it is not a real decommunization, because decommunization needs some structural rethinking of the Soviet heritage and the Soviet system, because mostly this Soviet system, for example, in official artistic sphere is still unchangeable since Soviet period. But at the same time, the visual object and symbols very intensively hidden or demolished. It's Żółte Блакить, our project. We worked at this documentation since 2015 till 2022, because at 2022 everything was changed, and this like a temporary solution for Soviet symbols was painted over by Żółte Блакить. Since February 2022 it doesn't work more, because even that objects which were painted after 2022 were destroyed, because this like a next level of intensity of this decommunization, and as I show this example with decorative panel by by Elfat Kadyrov, this some active phase of decommunization since 2015 and 2022. This period panels still exist, but after 2022, as we can see, they was removed, and especially about Motherland Monument. It was a very emotional polemic about this object. And I don't know. As for me, it's not a real decommunization step, because it's looked like to change these two symbols, Soviet symbols replaced by Ukrainian symbol. It's not really rethinking, because the stylistic and the visual form of this this monument is still Soviet, and we know for what and which idea and what this monument represent, and this replacing it's look like. Just try to avoid some difficult discussion about this. Just try to replace and let's say is it okay, but it's really need to some more deep rethinking.